Hello, I'm Tevin Needleman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program manager for Eco Districts. I am joined today by the lovely Darshna Patel to do our first installment of the Voices from the Field series. We are trying to make sure that we capture the voices of incredible individuals from across the field, and Darshna is joining us as an incredible resource from Gensler, and I'm going to pass it over to her to give herself a little introduction.
Thanks, Teva. That was so lovely. My name is Darshna Patel, and my pronoun is she. I work for Gensler, which is a large design firm based out of San Francisco, and I actually am a senior project architect, and I work mainly in workplace, but I've been getting into community and equity and racial, and diversity through training through Gensler.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As an accredited professional, I feel like you come in with a really interesting perspective because you've gone through the Eco Districts training, but you also have a whole career outside of working within the Eco District structure. And so this Voices from the Field is really just trying to capture where you are and how you look at equity with all of these different lenses that you hold. So to get started, I'd really love for you to tell me about a space that is special to you. What makes that a part of your story, and how has that place shaped you?
Yeah, so thank you, Teva. I would say that a place that's special to me is probably either India or my dad's ancestral home in Anand, India, which is actually it's being rebuilt right now. And I was born and raised in New Jersey, but I guess because I was first generation here, my presence here always felt kind of disconnected between the two cultures.
Yeah.
And plus, my dad would always say, like, between our like fence boundary, that the rules that we had to follow were the rules of India. um, so I guess what makes India part of my story, we used to go to India a lot for like our summer vacations and visit my grandparents, and I had some family there. And it really felt like an alternate universe. Like it was such a different world there. The community felt more welcoming, like literally from morning to before people went to sleep, like all the doors were open on the street. And people would just like randomly show up at your doorstep and just start talking to you. Cows and dogs would roam freely. And then, like, I think one thing I really loved about India is that we would have to walk to the market on a daily basis to get produce because there was no such thing as like having a stocked refrigerator.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that like the reality of that world, as chaotic as it was, it seemed like it made more sense to me. So yeah, even now I still love traveling to India when I have the chance. It's a good reality check.
What part of India is your family from?
So we're from a the state of Gujarat, which is like Midwest. So and it's there's a portion of it that borders the ocean, but it's a pretty, it's a farming and business state,
Yeah.
and we're out of like a smaller city called Anand.
Awesome. That's awesome. With COVID and everything, has your family that's still there, how are they doing?
Yeah, I mean it's hard there because generally the resources are not there to for everyone to safely maintain distance, as well as like there's some areas where it's so rural that you're not gonna have the access to the resources to like
Yeah.
maintain cleanliness. So the numbers are pretty bad there. Fortunately, the majority of my family is fine. I did lose one aunt, but
I'm so sorry.
I mean, I thank you. I appreciate that. But in the greater scheme of things, she was fairly old and she lived a really great life. So, I mean, um, yeah, I,
And I'd love to know how this lens of growing up and going to this very different reality, you said alternate universe almost, like how has that really helped shape your thoughts around equity and justice, and do you feel like it's measurable within the same spaces of India and in the United States? Like, how can those challenge and parallel each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally e- every place will have will can be seen through the lens of equity,
Mm.
and I saw this post by Dr. D.L. Stewart that explained the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice really well, and
Yeah,
I really look back at it from time to time to remind myself what the differences were, and
yeah,
so he says, or Dr. Stewart says. Diversity explains who's in the room. Equity asks who's trying to get in the room but can't, and whose presence in the room is constantly under the threat of erasure.
yeah,
Inclusion asks, has everybody's ideas been heard? And justice asks, whose ideas won't be taken seriously because they aren't in the majority. Diversity is, how many more Asians do we have, this year than last year? Equity is, what conditions have we created
yeah,
that maintain certain groups as the perpetual majority? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? And then justice, of course, challenges whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining their dehumanizing views. And so I really like this question of can this be measured? And I've
yeah.
been posing this question a lot actually to the team that I've been working with, researching equitable urbanism and then also closing the racial wealth gap in our cities. I would say yes, even though I'm still not 100% sure how we can measure it. Um, One thing that I'm certain of is that, the community that you're surrounded by does have a huge influence on whether you'll be successful in life. So I guess to have a going back to our conversation on history,
Yeah.
during urban renewal, huge tracts of buildings were demolished, and then in its place, large public housing towers were built. And so, like, imagine if you're a person that lives in one of those public housing towers, like you're going to be growing up in a bubble of other people that are also growing up the same way. And so the opportunities that you manifest are probably a direct influence of what is around you.
Yeah.
And then imagine if, like, that same housing complex also housed multimillionaires and they also lived with you. Maybe like then at least you have the opportunity to strike up a conversation with that person and say, what are you doing? How are you living a better life? And it provides that, like, you know, moment that you can see yourself as something greater than what you have at the moment. Um, and it's funny because there's actually Raj Chetty, who is a professor at Harvard,
Mhm.
studied this type of situation where they provided low income families opportunity vouchers to move to a better community.
Yeah.
And they actually, that from that study, they actually concluded also the same thing that we are saying, like that being surrounded by, diversity certainly gives you a better outlook for
Mhm.
upward movement and social mobility. Um, I guess like in terms of measurement, it probably also depends on um, a place basis as well as an individual basis. But I think, we can start asking the questions to come up with a baseline.
Yeah.
Like, are my parents educated? What level of education do they have? What type of community do I live in?
Yeah.
Am I surrounded by the same demographic? Like, what
Mhm.
are the income levels? Are they mixed? Um, I guess on an even more basic level, Genzer has been speaking a lot about how we can reimagine our neighborhoods as 20-minute cities, which is
Mm.
basically like, can I access all of my needs within a 20-minute walk without needing a car? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like go circling back to the India situation, right? Like on a day-to-day basis, I don't need everything, all my necessities in my house. They're 20 minutes away from me, 20 minutes walk. I go out to the market on a daily basis. I collect my produce and I come back home.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean that I have to get in the car, drive, 20 minutes
Yeah.
just to have access to my basic necessities.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you for all of that. Um, what do you think some first steps people can take towards creating a more anti-racist future could be?
So, I mean, honestly, I would say you have to be open. You have to be open to listening. You have to be open to opposing views.
Mm.
We've all come from a different, place of life and family situation, and so our priorities could be different than like other people's priorities,
Yeah.
or at least try to put yourself into their shoes and see, like, why does this person feel so strongly in this direction, and it might change your perspective, and you might be a little bit more tolerant um, of someone's views that are opposing to yours.
Yeah. No, I think that that's really incredible. Those first conversations and just the willingness to engage in them, I think, is a
Yeah.
really powerful first step in creating a better future and an anti-racist future.
Yeah, and it's always better to go deeper. Like
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes when we have conversations, it's always at a surface level, but
Yeah.
it's never like, okay, how did you grow up? Like, where is your family? I think once you start like going and peeling back those layers, you can see, you know, maybe this person didn't have like didn't grow up with a fortunate like situation, and you kind of it's providing that kind of layer of empathy of putting yourself into their shoes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Darshna, so sorry,
No,
Darshna, for
it's
your
okay.
time. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about how equity has impacted you a little bit and sharing about your family. I so appreciate everything. And do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share before we log off?
Um, okay, so one thing that I would love to say, and it's a Martin Luther King quote, and
Yeah,
it says, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And so, I should be helping you, Teva, being the best version of yourself. And honestly, if it truly takes a village, I mean, we should really be taking care of everyone that is around us.
yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Well,
Thank
thank
you for
you
this
so much,
opportunity.
of course. Thank you.